Hello, I'm Dainel Herbert, the managing editor of Boxing News, and this is Flashback, where we take a look back at a magazine from many years ago. This week it's Wednesday, May the 1st, 1935. Those days the magazine cost threepence in old money. It was different in those days. It came out on a Wednesday. Nowadays it comes out on a Thursday, and for a long time it came out on a Friday, so the day of the week has changed. It was a very different era in printing. It's often very difficult to get hold of live photographs or even posed studio photographs of fighters or fight figures. So we had a drawing on the front page. It was a famous personality of the ring, the late Lord Tweedmouth, who was obviously a patron of boxing back in those in between the wars days. And that drawing was specially drawn for boxing by Irene Wells. As I say, in those days it was very different. It's hard to get hold of news from around the world. The magazine was mostly British and Irish news based. We did have some news in the United States. Turn to the back page, I had a whole page column called In the Shadow of the Skyscrapers, where a man called Peter Varley corresponded from New York. There's some very interesting stuff there. He led off with the victory by James J. Braddock over Art Lasky in New York. Of course, James J. Braddock became famous as a Cinderella man who went on to dethrone Max Baer, become world heavyweight champion later in 1935. But the Art Lasky win, I think, was his last fight before dethroning Max Baer in what was a big upset at the time. And our man Peter Varley says the way James J. trounced Lasky has left no room for doubt that he will give Baer all the trouble he wants when the pair meet in the Garden Bowl. That was about 2 months later in the summer of 35. So credit Peter Varley for not exactly picking the upset, but at least saying that Braddock would give Baer trouble, because Baer was a massive favourite for that fight, because Braddock had been a good light heavyweight a few years earlier. Then he'd taken a couple of years out during the Depression and actually gone to work on the docks in New Jersey or New York to earn a living for his family. All this was in the famous film Cinderella Man, which came out with Russell Crowe a few years ago. Russell Crowe as James J. Braddock. Braddock was a good fighter, but he'd been out for years and had a hand problem. But obviously, once he got back on the rails, back in training, once he got back boxing on a regular basis, then his talent came to the fore, and he was a good fighter. And he certainly hammered Art Lasky. And Varley says that Braddock won in such a way the verdict was assured long before the finish, and Art left the ring a badly beaten man. And then Varley also revealed that Lasky went into the fight with the right hand, which he calls his deadly weapon, completely useless, as Varley says. But apparently Lasky's brother, Maurice, was criticised for taking the fight and going through with it, but he justified it by saying that Art Lasky had come so near a big shot at the world heavyweight title that he just had to go through with it. He just felt he couldn't pass up the chance. It might be the only chance he'd ever get, so he just had to take it. When Peter Varley comments on that, well, there are two ways of looking at that, but frankly one can understand why Maurice Lasky went through with the fight. Also in his New York page, Peter Varley has a good conversation with Slapsy Maxie Rosenblum, the former world cruiserweight champion, or light heavyweight champion as the cruiserweight division was also known. Talking about Maxie giving his opinion on fighters of the day, I reckon Gene Tunney was a really great fighter, but Jack Dempsey wasn't. And the direct quote from Rosenblum is, "Jack never fell within the classification." That seems a bit harsh on Jack Dempsey, but then Tunney had beaten him twice, so maybe some people just didn't rate Dempsey. But I think over the years, over the decades, opinion has changed, and most people wrote Dempsey and Tunney as great fighters. But the one guy that Rosenblum was very high on was the lightweight champion of the 1920s, Benny Leonard. And Varley quotes Rosenblum as saying, "There was a fighter for you. He was the only man I ever saw who could move fast and hit hard." So obviously Rosenblum was a big fan of Benny Leonard, who was a great fighter. Of course, Benny lost a lot of money in the Depression, in the Great Crash of 1929, came back in the 30s and boxed on, never won a title, but did earn some money, but he was just a shadow of the fighter he had been when he was lightweight champion in the early 20s. And that's Peter Varley's New York column, and that's Flashback for May the 1st, 1935.